church family. Good to see you all here this morning, and I, like Damon, want to also extend my thanks and to Taylor Isom for all the times that he has worked here and has been part of our community and part of our church. I am having this time with him, got a chance to get to know him a little better, and it seemed like every time one of our conversations with Taylor was always, "Hey, do you know so-and-so? They went to ACU about the same time you did," or "Do you remember so-and-so? They lived in Abilene." And so we wish Taylor well on all of his endeavors as he goes back to Rising Star, and we hope that we know that he'll do a good job there. Also, I want to encourage you all also to come back tonight as Truett Adair, from Sunset comes to deliver us a report about the solar-powered audio playing devices. It's never had a really distinct name. It's always been called something like that. But I have seen these things in action. We had a guy come to one of our preachers' meetings and bring that little device, and it's really neat. And so we did help support. We did raise some money. One of our Fifth Sunday contributions last year was for that, and so we are anxious to hear from him. Plus, he's the president of Sunset. I mean, I'm sure he knows how to preach, so I'm sure he'll deliver us a good message and a good report. It's good to see you all here. I know we have many people who are out on vacation right now. Still, we got many people who are traveling about, and we want to make sure we pray for them, and we want to make sure that they know that we're thinking about them, and we got people coming forth, and so it just seems like this is part of summer. And when I first had planned this, someone said, Blaine, you don't want to do one of your major popular apostles right in the middle of summer because nobody's going to get a chance to hear it. And I said, well, you know what? If we're recording, then they can watch it anytime they want to. So we're going to continue to go on through. We're looking at the whole year as a call to discipleship is what we've been talking about and worshiping and thinking about. And we're taking 12 distinct verses, and applying those to our hearts and understanding why those are important. We're talking about concepts of discipleship that many of us need to know about and be reminded of. But the best way to understand what it means to be a disciple of Christ is to emulate the apostles that were the disciples who turned into apostles, or however you want to look at that. And so we're looking at each of the 12. I know that one month we weren't able to do that, and so we're going to combine two disciples at that time. But today we are going to look at Peter. We're going to talk about Peter and the concepts and the aspects that he had that applied to what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. In Matthew chapter 10, Acts chapter 1, Mark does it in Mark chapter 3, and of course that was read today in Luke 6. In all four, Peter is listed at the first, and Judas is listed at the last. Each group is listed in the order in which each group is called. Now we know less about members of each group as we progress down the list, and the groups were never varied. They were always the same. The order and within the group may have changed, but the grouping was always the same. The same names were always listed in a particular order in the group of every list. Now, I made it a point. What does that tell us? Well, it tells us that as the apostles would always, as they became in the light and the 12 became more significant, the 12 would have a leader. And yes, Jesus was the main leader. He was the teacher. He was the rabbi. But there was always one person who was always ahead of the pack, if you will. He was the one who, it was Peter. He had leadership qualities, but not at first. Not at first. In Luke, in the Gospel of in Luke chapter 5, there's a unique story about how Jesus is at the lake, and a crowd is gathered around him, and he's standing at the water's edge, and I guess he's worried that he's not going to be able to do his job well, and so he looks, and there's a couple of boats and a couple of fishermen, and so he goes over to the boats, and he says, "Hey, let me get into your boat, and you cast out a little bit in shallow water." And it just so happens he hops in Peter's boat. Peter's sitting there, and he's mending his nets, doing his work. They've been fishing all night. And Jesus is preaching and teaching, and finally when the crowd is dismissed, for whatever reason, I like to think that Jesus was like, well, hey, look, since I've took advantage of your boat for a while, let me give you some benefit from using your boat. Let me pay you for the use of your boat as my pulpit for a little while, and you cast out in the water and lower your nets for a catch. And Peter was like, Master, he calls him Master because he probably recognized that Jesus was a very talented man, a very knowledgeable man after all the preaching that he heard just a few minutes ago. So he calls him Master. He says, Master, we've been fishing all night. Haven't caught a thing, but if you say so, we'll do it. And so they lower their nets, and of course you know how the rest of the story transpires. The nets get so full that they have to call other people over to help them load up all that fish that's coming in. And then Peter says something very distinct and very unique. He looks at Jesus right in the eye and he says, "Depart from me," or "Leave me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." And it's just me, but a part of me feels like that at that instant, Jesus knew that he had found the man who could be the leader of the group. That confession, that self-analyzation, you are so great and I am not that wonderful of a person, is what Jesus is looking for. It was the beginning of that raw materials that we're looking about, the raw materials of Peter. What a strange sermon title, but there's no other way I could put it. He had those raw materials, and Jesus says, do not be afraid. In other words, don't worry about how you feel about yourself, Peter. Don't worry about that. I am going to, from now on, you're going to not be catching more than fish. You're going to be catching men. So all that transpired. And though Peter wasn't the first to be called by Jesus, he is put in line as first because Jesus chose him of first importance. He was chosen, he was acknowledged as the leader of the group. Now, many times throughout the history of the church, I don't defend it, but I can quite understand how some people, some church organizations, some people in theology assume that because of what happened with Peter, it makes him kind of a leader of the church, a head of the church, like the first pope, if you will. But I don't believe that. I mean, I believe that Christ is the head of the church, and everything else kind of falls into that line. But Peter did have some leadership qualities that Jesus saw, and so therefore it made him, like I said, the leader of the group. And that's probably one of the most encouraging things about Peter being chosen as the leader. And you're going to see as we look at his character further, it is Peter that is the most human. It's Peter who's the most passionate. It's Peter who's the most involved. Peter is the one who's he's most likely to say the wrong things at the wrong time out of any of the 12, which is the reason why my brother refers to Peter as the apostle with the foot-shaped mouth. And all these reasons, if anything, should be encouraging. It shows that Jesus cares more. He cares more about our willingness to be used of Him than any of our abilities or our weaknesses. All Jesus needs, all He needs is raw material. Raw material made available that He can do His work and make something special. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, about 27 through 29, Paul says to the church in Corinth, "But God chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong, and the base things of the world and the despised things God chosen, these things that are not, that He might nullify the things that are, and that no man should boast before God." If anything, if anyone is the definition or the picture of what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, it's these 12 guys. These 12 men. All of them with shady past, backgrounds. These group of men living witnesses, and they were witnesses to the fact, and I would submit to you this morning that Peter is right at the head of the list. So we're going to look at Peter this morning. Peter, the big-time fisherman. He was a big-time fisherman from Galilee. And if you remember Galilee, well, Galilee was not a very popular place. And I don't know how do you compare it. I mean, Galilee was, redneck territory. There wasn't not a whole popular place. You just, you didn't go down to Galilee to hang out and have a good time. You went in Galilee and you worked. I don't know how you compare it to, but it was full of not so great people. But we're going to look at Peter. He was from Galilee, the man from Galilee, and it wasn't that great of a place. But here's some other facts about Peter. Peter was given the name Simon. Simon was a very common name, a very ordinary name. It was a name that almost every other person had in biblical times. And he was the son of a man called Jonah. And some very interesting things about that, and I find it very interesting how this all works out. He was given the name Simon. He was the son of Jonah. And Simon Peter was married. But before we get to Simon Peter was married, I got to tell you, okay, Simon's dad's name, or he was the son of Jonah, right? He worked as a fisherman with another group of brothers, James and John. James and John were the son of Zebedee. Okay, so you have Jonah and Zebedee. Now, interestingly enough, at this time forward, if a sailor referred to someone on the boat as a Jonah, wasn't a good thing. Because everyone knows the story of Jonah, followed by the big fish and everything else. So if you were called a Jonah on a sailboat by a sailor, that meant you were bad luck. So I don't know how Jonah's business transpired through all this time. But interestingly enough, does anyone, you may not know this, does anyone know what Jonah's name translates to in Hebrew? It means dove. Jonah's name means dove. So you have Simon, son of dove, and you have James and John, son of Zebedee, which translates into thunder. So technically, if you really wanted to be this is the way my mind works sometimes, sorry. It was the Dove and Thunder Fishing Company. So that, think about that for a while and see how that works out. But Simon Peter was also married. And how do we know this? Well, we know this because Jesus heals his mother-in-law in Matthew chapter 8, verses 14 and 17. Must have been a really good mother-in-law. Because Simon Peter wanted Jesus to take care of her. Simon Peter was not educated. He was not a learned man. There was no college. There was no Sunset International Bible Institute. He didn't even have a high school. He didn't have his GED. Simon grew up learning how to do one thing and one thing only. Well, actually two things. Drive a boat and fish. And there's many guys out there who are thinking now, boy, that'd be a good job to have. But anyway, so Simon was not educated. Yet, Simon was what we would call, he was a man's man. He had the tan look on his face from being out in the sun too long. He would probably have the redneck tan where his arms are all brown but his chest is white. Why? Because he's out there in the sea all day and he's fishing. His hands are probably calloused from the nets that he's been pulled in all day long. He probably knows how to swear like a sailor. He probably knows where all the good fishing spots are. He probably knows how to handle the nets and how to mend nets so that his nets don't break when everybody else's does. He's a man who knows how to work. And he's skilled at his job. And he's loyal and he's faithful to his family and his friends. Being a man's man means he's a man of integrity, a man who cares deeply for others. And being a good Jewish person, he's probably thankful to the Lord that he has a job, that he can provide for his family. And so because of that, he thanks God for the work and for life itself. Now these characteristics are more than make up the man that we know was called Simon, but Jesus gives him another nickname, Cephas or Peter, which means rock, and Jesus basically calls him Rocky from here on out. Especially when he focuses in Matthew 16:16, where Peter gives that great confession, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And if you're in Matthew 16:16, put your little bookmark there because we're going to go back there here in a minute. But all these things are some really good facts about Peter, but we're going to take a look at what Jesus had to work with. See, when Jesus meets Peter, he sees raw material. He says, that is something that I can use, I can shape into someone who's going to be the leader after I'm gone. And so Jesus had to work hard to make Peter the leader amongst the men. And we're going to look at the raw materials. What did Jesus have to work with? Well, first, Peter was the man who asks questions. And believe me, he asked a lot of questions. In fact, if you take all the questions asked by Jesus, by everyone else in the gospel records, you will find all of those questions combined they asked are fewer questions than Peter asked. In other words, every question that's asked amongst Jesus and his 12, Peter beats them out. Peter always wanted to know why something was so, what something meant, or what he was supposed to do with the something that Jesus taught or did. It was Peter who asked how many times he should forgive his brother. It was Peter who asked, look, Lord, we've left everything to follow you. What then will there be for us? Matthew chapter 19:27. It was Peter who wanted to know what Jesus meant in his teachings, like in Matthew 13, and Matthew 15, and Mark 11, and Mark 13. It was Peter who suggested, that's kind of funny, it was Peter who suggested they build 3 tabernacles, one for Jesus, one for Elijah, and one for the other one at the Mount of Transfiguration, Moses at the Mount of Transfiguration. It was Peter who declared that Jesus should be so defiant and speak about his upcoming death. It was Peter who declared that even if the rest of the disciples were to run away, Peter would never leave. Abandon Jesus. He would go to Jesus. He would follow Christ all the way into death. And there's more, much more that Peter, all of Peter's questioning and all of Peter's questions that he asked, but you get the idea. But the important thing is to understand that people who become leaders, about this characteristic, the thing you understand about this characteristic is people who become leaders are people who want to know the what and the why of something. They are are the people who are asking to seek solutions to the problems and questions and doubts in their lives and the lives of those around them. This is the first and perhaps probably the strongest characteristic in Peter's arsenal of raw materials that makes him become the leader that he is. Secondly, Peter was always the one who was closest or nearest to Jesus. And I mean right in the middle of everything. I'm sure that the common phrase amongst Jesus and Peter was, "Excuse me, Peter, can you get out of my way for a second?" Because why? Did you ever have one of those friends when you were younger who you have something and it's in a bowl or it's in a box and you want to show everybody? And so the first thing you say is, "Hey, y'all, come look at this." And there's always that one friend who comes up right to you and sticks his head clean over the box so nobody else can see. I had one of those buddies. And it's like, and you always got to say, "Now stand aside, move over so everybody else can see." But no, he wants to be right there. He wants to know what's in that box. That's Peter. He was the one who was closest, nearest to Jesus, right in the middle of everything. Whenever Jesus went, unless he sent them away and he wanted to be by himself, whenever he turned around, there was Peter. Looking over the gospel accounts, I get the impression that Jesus probably and literally bumped into Peter more times than many. When Jesus is walking on the water during the storm, who is it that gets out of the boat and walks toward Jesus? Good old Peter. Who is it that when Jesus always chooses to go with him on special outings with James and John, it's always good old Peter. On the night that Jesus is arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, who is at his side with a sword, swinging a sword that he doesn't know anything how to use, and literally misses, but he cuts off some guy's ear, sitting right by his side? Good old Peter, trying to defend his Lord. Through the Gospels, it's good old Peter who is found to be present when Jesus does something or asks a question. In fact, Peter is the only disciple around the home of the high priest that night that Jesus is tried by the Sanhedrin. Granted, Peter denied Christ, yes, 3 times, as Jesus had predicted he would. But none of the other disciples were around to deny their Lord. Just him. The point I'm trying to make is leaders are people who make things happen, who are in the middle of great events as they happen. That's Peter for sure. The third thing we see about the raw materials that Jesus had to work with was simply this. Peter had initiative. Peter had initiative. We saw that some of this, when we talk about Peter walking on the water a few minutes ago. All the disciples, okay, they're terrified in the storm, and yet it's Peter alone who is willing to step out of the boat. "Lord, if that is you, call me out and onto the water with you." And Jesus says, "Come on." And Peter gets out of the boat and he walks on the water toward Jesus. And this is just like many other times we see in the Bible. Jesus tells this really great parable or gives this really great message. And everybody, including the 12, is looking back at Christ with that look on their face like, "Okay, I know what you said was important, but I have no idea what you're talking about." Kind of like some of the looks I'm getting right now. And so Peter is the only one who looks at the other 11 and says, okay, they had the same look on their face as I do on mine. And so what does he say? "Lord, we don't know what you were saying. Please explain it to us." Initiative. I don't think anybody else would have had the gumption or the courage or the initiative to say, hey, Matthew, I don't know what he's talking about, do you? No, just keep listening. Maybe he'll explain it here in a minute. But no, that's not Peter. Peter's like, hey, whoa, wait a minute. Time out, Jesus. Could you explain what you just said to us, please? I'm just a fisherman. I don't get it. Initiative. Not afraid to do the things that need to get done. Peter was willing to take a risk. Just like he was willing to take a risk to get out of the boat and walk on water. There were 11 other guys in that boat. All of them on the same storm. All of them seeing the same thing. And it was Peter who calls out to Christ and says, if it's you, call me and I'll come out to you. And it was only the one, Peter, who got out of the boat. Yes, he sank. But he had initiative. And when he gets back into the boat, I'm sure the other 11 guys, you got all wet. And it's Peter who can look back around now and says, yeah, but I got out of the boat. Where were you? Initiative. What does it mean? It means this. Leaders are willing to take risk. Leaders have the ability to take the initiative when others just want to sit back and watch. I call that leading by faith and not by fear. Oh, we can't do that, Bland. We don't have enough money in the budget. Oh, we can't do that, Bland. We've tried that 5 different times, and all different times it falls flat on their face. Oh, we can't do that, Bland. There's not enough people in the congregation. That's leading by fear. Let it not be done in this church anymore. Peter was willing to take a risk. Now, they have the ability to take the initiative. And again, we see that Peter was pretty much destined because of this and other things that he had in his raw materials. Peter was destined to become the person that the Lord wanted him to be. Now, Peter did have a couple of traits that, Peter did have a couple of traits that weren't all that great. And those traits got him off the straight and narrow. First of all, he vacillated a lot. He wavered a lot. 1 second, he's a staunch follower and a believer. And the next, he is faithless and doubtful. And this is something that seems to have followed him all through his life, even long after he became the leader of the new church at large. The spokesperson, if you will. But look again at Peter's little, if you want to call it a walk on the wild side, that's fine. Here he is, he's walking on the water toward Jesus, demonstrating a greater faith than his buddies, and then in the boat, and then what happens? He gets his eyes off Christ, he gets afraid of the storm, and he starts to sink. And of course, Jesus is right there with him. He says, Lord, save me. Jesus does, pulls him back out of the water, and Jesus says, oh, you little faith, why did you not believe? But there are many times when Jesus is going to have to take Peter and pull him aside to a place of safety, to a place of peace, to a place where there is calmness, where there is balance. Go back and look at Matthew chapter 16. We've been talking about it for the past 2 Sundays. And I'm not trying to wear this verse out. But take note again, and especially at the end of verse 16 of Matthew chapter 16. He says, Simon answered, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. The key foundation statement of what we believe and how we should present. And of course, what does Jesus say? Well, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but my Father in heaven. I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. And later he goes on to explain how Peter and the rest of the 12 were going to be able to deliver this message, deliver who Jesus was, to explain to even to the Gentiles how this brand new idea of a congregation was going to happen. And yet, Go down and look at verse 21. From that time, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the day be raised. Verse 22, good old Peter took him aside and said, never, Lord, this shall never happen to you. Translation, over my dead body. It's not a question of not having faith of what's going to happen, or Peter is thinking Jesus is talking nonsense. Peter is trying to say, they got to get through me first, Jesus, because I love you that much. And what does Jesus say? Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. What a crazy contradiction. One moment Christ is loving up on Peter because he knows that God gave Peter that declaration of who Jesus really was. And then in the next minute, he's getting on to Peter and calling Peter the devil. And there were other accounts where we see Peter doing this very same fact. In fact, we see God giving Peter an opportunity to unlock the kingdom of heaven to the Gentiles in Acts chapter 10. The interesting thing is about this account is once again we find Peter arguing with the Lord. Peter's on top of a house. Simon the tanner's house has a vision. Animals on a blanket coming down, and a voice from heaven says, kill and eat Peter. And Peter goes, not I, Lord, for I am a Jew, and I have never had an unclean thing touch my lips. Thinking like, oh yeah, that's going to be the right answer. And what does he hear from heaven? Don't call anything I created unclean. And he has to do it 2 more times. So here's Peter understanding that the Gentiles have the exact same right as the Jews in understanding the new concept of Jesus' congregation. And by the way, we fall into that category. Willing to take risk, willing to take initiative, willing to go head first, and when he's corrected, he turns around and goes right back the other direction. There was a time where him and Paul had a really good, heavy argument. Peter was hanging out, loving on the Gentiles, eating with them, hanging out with them, having supper with them, and then some Jews walk in, and Peter gets up and starts hanging out with the Jews instead. And Paul gets upset and confronts him. What does Peter do? Immediately he repents and turns around. And that is probably another good trait. A strong trait of Peter's character. It was that he was the man who did not do things halfway. Peter was all in or not. And that's a trait that happened all the way through. Do you remember when Jesus is resurrected? And Mary goes and tells the disciples, who is it that runs back to the tomb? It's Peter and John. John, being the younger one, beats him. And in my mind, I see it this. Here's the tomb at the bottom of this mountain, and then here's a hill that they're coming down the hill. John makes it, doesn't go in. But what I see is Peter coming down that hill, full tilt. I mean, he is booking it, and he just right past John and doesn't even stop, runs right into the tomb. Because he wants to see what Mary's talking about. In the first chapter of Acts, is pretty much about Peter. There he kind of establishes himself as the definite leader of the church. In Acts chapter 1, he's the one who determines without instruction from the Lord that Judas must be replaced. In Acts chapter 2, he becomes the spokesman and delivers probably the most powerful spiritual sermon of all time. In Acts chapter 3, he and John heal the lame man and defy the Sanhedrin in Acts chapter 4. In Acts chapter 5, he demonstrates a profound gift of knowledge and wisdom and prophecy when he deals with the hypocrisy of Ananias and Sapphira. In Acts chapter 8, he takes care of the desires of Simon the magician, who wants to buy the Holy Spirit from Peter and have those abilities that he can bestow on others. And then finally in Acts chapter 9, he heals Aeneas and raises Dorcas from the dead. In Acts chapter 10 and 11, it's Peter who's the first one to preach the gospel to the Gentiles and to see the first Gentile conversion of Christianity since Christ's ascension. Tradition tells us that Peter was led away in his death, as was prophesied to him by Christ in John 21. Tradition tells that he was forced to first watch his wife die as his wife was also crucified. The story says that Peter stood before his wife's cross saying over and over again, "Remember the Lord, remember the Lord, remember the Lord." And then when it was his turn to die, tradition also goes on to say that he requested to be crucified upside down because he felt like he wasn't worthy to die the Savior had. Through all of his life, in spite of all of the weaknesses and shortcomings, it was Peter who was determined to be determined. Strength, nobility, character. Through all of his writings, he accomplishes the mission of Jesus by passing on these lessons of grace, of courage, of self-control, submission, authority, self-sacrifice, devotion to the gospel, deep abiding love for Christ Jesus, and all these other messages. It's through Peter and his writings that this is accomplished. What kind of raw material does Jesus have to work with in you? Can you identify with Peter? I know I can. If so, then there's no reason to wait. There's a lot of raw material in this congregation that Jesus can work with if you'll just give him a chance, if you'll just give him a shot. And let Jesus start right now, today, teaching, molding you, giving you lessons to learn, shaping your character into the character that he desires so that he might use you as mighty as he used Peter. This morning, if there's someone here who is subject to the invitation, we want you to extend it to you now. Please come forward as we stand and as we sing.